what if the only way to save modern religion is to just completely abandon its traditional structures?
Yeah, that is a massive question to start with.
Right. But that is exactly what we are jumping into today. Welcome to another deep dive. We have this really fascinating stack of sources for you today.
We really do.
Yeah.
And it's not light reading.
No, definitely not. Today's mission is to unpack these sources which detail a modern spiritual movement and its central text. It's called BABASHUVA, A New World, A New Reality, and it's written by this figure named Nathan or Benzvi.
Right. And the materials we have in front of us are remarkably comprehensive. I mean, we're not just looking at some light self-help philosophy here.
Yeah, it's dense.
Very. These sources include highly detailed philosophical matrices comparing major world religions. We've got sociological reviews of the movement's core tenets and, extensive direct excerpts from the text itself.
So it's positioning itself as like an urgent spiritual response?
Exactly. A response to a modern world fractured by war, intense materialism, and what the text specifically critiques as empty religious practices.
Which is a bold claim. So our goal for this deep dive is to impartially explore the claims, theology, and practical philosophy of this modern movement.
Right, and just to be clear up front, we are just looking at what the text claims here, not endorsing any specific theology or political viewpoint.
Exactly. We just want to convey the ideas in the source material. But before we get into the mechanics of how this text attempts to deconstruct all this theological exclusivity, we should probably look at the name itself.
The nomenclature is super important here. It sets the stage for the entire philosophy.
So BABASHUVA, break that down for us.
Yeah, so the name BABASHUVA operates as a theological compound word. The first element, Baba, translates to father.
Okay, like a familial term.
Right. The text uses this to emphasize a really intimate familial connection between humanity and the divine.
So distancing itself from like a strict or punishing kind of dynamic.
Precisely. And then the second element, shuva, derives from the Hebrew root shuv.
Which means...
It denotes a return or like a profound repentance. So when you put it together, BABASHUVA literally translates to returning humanity to the Father.
Wow, okay. That structural breakdown immediately introduces a tension we need to explore. I mean, the concept of returning to a source implies the current state of affairs is deeply deviated from its origin.
Oh, absolutely. It implies we're very far off track.
And looking at the first major section of our sources, Nathan, or Benzvi, introduces this return through this really paradoxical framing of his own identity.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting.
Because the text explicitly quotes him declaring, "I am not a prophet and not the son of a prophet."
Right.
Yet at the same time, the surrounding commentary in the sources describes him having divine visions, hearing a specific guiding voice, and bearing a global spiritual mission to rebuke the masses.
Yeah, seems contradictory, right?
Totally. How do we reconcile that?
Well, that apparent contradiction serves as a deliberate structural reconstruction of what prophetic authority actually means today. I mean, in a post-industrial, heavily secularized age.
So he's redefining the job description.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
To understand the mechanism here, you really have to analyze the historical context of traditional prophecy.
Right, like in the Bible or the Quran.
Exactly. If you look at those ancient eras, a prophet operated adjacent to a king, or they functioned directly as a lawmaker.
Or like the architect of a new nation.
Right. They held profound geopolitical power and institutional authority. They established borders, dictated legal codes, commanded societal structures.
They were establishing the macro-level operating systems for entirely new civilizations. I mean, Moses wasn't just offering spiritual advice on the weekend.
No, not at all.
He was handing down a comprehensive legal code to a newly freed population of slaves who completely lacked any societal infrastructure.
Right. The authority had to be absolute and top-down for that society to survive the harsh conditions of the ancient Near East.
And that kind of absolute authority just doesn't fly today.
Exactly. That aligns perfectly with the text's assertion that ancient models of prophecy are fundamentally incompatible with the modern human condition.
So Nathan R. is presented as a distinctly modern figure.
Yes, he's stepping entirely away from the archaic prophet-king or prophet-lawgiver archetypes. By explicitly stating, "I am not a prophet," he is signaling a total rejection of geopolitical hierarchy.
He doesn't want to be a king.
Right. The sources describe him instead as someone bearing the acute, collective spiritual pain of his specific generation.
And the text seems to argue that the pain of the modern generation is fundamentally different from the pain of antiquity.
Oh, without a doubt.
I mean, think about it. We are navigating a post-World War reality, late-stage capitalism, the omnipresence of extreme materialism.
Overwhelming.
Yeah. And we're watching ancient religious institutions physically and politically clash. While, on a microsociological level, we're dealing with the total atomization of the individual.
The breakdown of traditional community structures.
Exactly. It's like, to use an analogy, it sounds like updating the operating system of human spirituality.
Oh, I like that.
Like the old systems were built for isolated, standalone computers. But today we are entirely networked, yet crashing from malware, like extreme materialism and violence.
That is a brilliant way to phrase it. And because the network is crashing, it necessitates a completely different mechanism for delivering a spiritual message.
The old model just won't install anymore.
Right. A singular figure handing down rigid exclusionary laws from a mountaintop simply does not compute for a highly networked, globalized society.
Especially a society that is inherently skeptical of institutional authority.
Exactly. Just look at the demographic data surrounding modern seekers of meaning, particularly younger generations.
They are leaving traditional institutions in droves.
Right. The data shows a clear disillusionment with
Right.
traditional institutional religion. They cite corruption, historical violence, bureaucratic hypocrisy.
Yet the same sociological data points indicate that this disillusionment hasn't eradicated the underlying human craving for meaning.
Not at all. The void is still there. People are actively seeking spiritual frameworks.
They just reject the rigid terms and conditions of joining a highly specific, exclusionary religious institution.
Exactly. And BABASHUVA attempts to step directly into that void by offering an unmediated framework.
Removing the institutional title of prophet makes the message accessible rather than authoritarian.
Yes. It frames the text not as a command from a distant deity, but as a shared realization of mutual human suffering.
And a proposed universal path out of that trauma.
Right.
Well, to truly understand the audacity of this proposed universal path, we have to look closely at the comparative matrix provided in the sources.
Oh, this part is fascinating.
It really is. This is perhaps the most analytically dense section of the material. The text places BABASHUVA's theology side by side with Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
Breaking down the core problem of humanity and the proposed solution.
Yes, according to four major prophetic figures: Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, and Nathan Orr.
The matrix essentially functions as a historical dialectic. It distills millennia of complex theological evolution into distinct mechanistic phases.
Let's walk through them. It begins with the tradition of Moses.
Right. Under Moses, the core ontological problem identified in humanity is sin.
Which manifests specifically as a lack of law.
Yes, and the proposed solution is the Torah and the covenant.
Which makes perfect sense when we apply historical context. The Israelites were transitioning from subjugation to autonomy.
The mechanism for survival was strict adherence to a collective national law.
It created order out of chaos, but it also required rigid boundaries, right, between the holy and the profane, and between the tribe and the outside world.
Exactly. So then moving to the second phase, the matrix analyzes Jesus.
And here the primary problem shifts.
Right, from a lack of external law to an internal condition, the hardness of heart.
The text suggests the legalistic system had become too rigid, losing its human element.
Yes. So the mechanism for the solution becomes love and grace. The focus pivots from governing collective national behavior to healing the individual's spiritual and emotional state.
Okay, then the Matrix brings in Muhammad.
In this third paradigm, the problem identified is the deviation from God's will.
The historical context here is important too. You have fragmented, warring, polytheistic tribes.
Right, so the solution mechanism is submission.
Which is the literal translation of Islam.
Yes, submission and rigorous discipline. It aims to reestablish a macro-level order by uniting disparate peoples under a singular, absolute divine will.
Which brings us to the fourth paradigm, Nathan Orr and BABASHUVA.
The Matrix identifies the defining problem of the modern era as the loss of humanity.
And the proposed solution.
Repentance, that Shuva concept we talked about, and absolute human unity.
Okay, I have to push back a little here. We need to apply some serious analytical scrutiny to the text on this point.
Go for it.
Because on the surface, defining the core problem as a loss of humanity sounds dangerously close to just a modern, secular-sounding rebrand of what Moses called sin or what Jesus called a hard heart.
That's a very fair critique.
I mean, if the diagnosis is essentially identical, that humans are flawed and mistreat each other, is BABASHUVA actually offering a new philosophical framework, or is it just updating the marketing language for the 21st century?
Well, the sources actually anticipate that exact critique.
Oh, do they?
Yeah, the text defends its position by highlighting a fundamental shift in where the ontological baseline of value is placed.
Unpack that for me.
So, if you examine the mechanisms of the previous three paradigms, they all require the construction or adoption of a specific exclusionary religious identity to achieve salvation or alignment.
Okay.
To participate in the solution, you had to enter the Israelite covenant, or accept Christ, or submit to Islam.
You adopted a label that inherently separated you from the other.
Precisely. You had to cross a boundary line to join the in-group. But BABASHUVA proposes exactly the opposite.
It wants to erase the boundary line.
Right. Its core thesis is that in the modern era, those very boundary lines and labels had become the primary engines of our destruction.
So the religions themselves became part of the problem.
According to the text, yes. It argues that before an individual can strive to be an ethical Jew, Christian, or Muslim, they must return to a more foundational baseline.
Their biological and spiritual humanity.
Yes. The central recurring motif in the text is the phrase, "Under the flesh, we are all human."
That is a visceral, deeply biological reduction.
Very much so. The text explicitly lists out demographic and theological identities: Jewish, Muslim, Christian, black, white, man, woman, and asserts that beneath those sociological constructs, we are identically comprised of skin, bones, and tendons.
It literally strips away every theological requirement until you are left with nothing but a human being confronting another human being.
It is a radical leveling of the theological playing field. Contrast this with the highly hierarchical society established by Moses.
Right, with the strict stratifications of priests, Levites, and the general populace.
Or consider the Islamic concept of the Ummah, the global community of believers. It creates a powerful internal unity, but it inherently maintains a distinct boundary against non-believers.
Even Christianity, which historically dismantled many of the rigorous Jewish dietary and ritual laws, ultimately instituted a profound boundary based on belief and salvation.
Exactly. So BABASHUVA is defining the loss of humanity not as a theological transgression against a specific set of divine laws,
but as the cognitive failure to recognize the skin and bones reality of the person standing in front of you.
That is the exact mechanism. The sin is the prioritization of the label over the biological reality.
Wow. But if you perform this radical deconstruction, if you strip away the religious labels, the ethnic markers, and the national borders,
It changes everything.
it necessitates a complete overhaul of how we understand the concept of God. Because traditional religious structures provide the interface through which humans interact with the divine.
Right.
If you dismantle the interface, how does BABASHUVA define God?
The sources provide a really meticulous comparative analysis of this evolution as well.
Let's hear it.
Well, in the Mosaic tradition, God is primarily conceptualized as king, judge, and lawgiver,
The defining characteristic is holiness.
which inherently implies separation and elevation above the mundane physical world. There's a necessary authoritative distance required for a legalistic framework to function.
Then the Christian paradigm reframes God much more intimately as a loving, forgiving Father, emphasizing proximity and grace.
Right. Following that, the Islamic paradigm conceptualizes God as the absolute one, supreme, indivisible, and transcending all physical attributes.
Expressly rejecting any theology that suggests God could have a son or manifest in human form.
Exactly. Which brings us to how BABASHUVA synthesizes or diverges from these established views.
It uses the term father, right?
It does, but the sources emphasize it means father to all nations. It describes the divine as the source of life and as a universal moral consciousness.
So it moves away from the concept of an anthropomorphic king demanding tribute.
Yes, and moves toward a foundational source of morality that permeates all existence, regardless of human geography.
That is a huge shift. And this shift in the concept of God must inherently alter the concept of man and the mechanisms of redemption across these four traditions.
Oh, completely. Let's break down those differences because they are essential to understanding BABASHUVA's appeal.
Okay, let's start with traditional Judaism.
In Judaism, human nature is viewed as prone to error, which necessitates the strict framework of the law and the active pursuit of tikkun olam.
Which is a Hebrew concept meaning the repair or healing of the world.
Right, achieved through specific commandments and ethical actions.
While in classical Christianity, the baseline is often original sin. Humanity cannot achieve salvation purely through physical actions or legal adherence.
Redemption is a mechanism of divine grace granted through faith.
Okay, and Islam.
In Islam, the baseline shifts again. Man is born pure, unburdened by original sin, but is tested in this world.
So redemption is achieved through action.
Through the active, disciplined choice to submit to the absolute will of Allah through daily prayer, fasting, and charity.
Okay, so what is the baseline for humanity in BABASHUVA? I mean, if there's no specific law to follow, no original sin requiring divine grace, and no specific religious submission mandated, how does one achieve redemption?
In BABASHUVA, the text posits that humanity simply needs to remember its own nature. The mechanism for redemption is entirely internal and cognitive.
So it's about awareness.
Yes. The sources are aggressively clear that redemption is not located within institutional structures.
Right. It explicitly critiques reliance on spiritual intermediaries.
It denounces corrupt religious leaders, the selling of magical amulets, the worship at tombs. Redemption is framed as the internal realization of truth and the cessation of hatred.
That brings up a fascinating theological balancing act detailed in the sources, particularly regarding how BABASHUVA handles the figure of Jesus.
Yeah, this is a very delicate part of the text.
It really is. The text seems to be threading a very fine needle to maintain its claim to universal accessibility while still navigating centuries of entrenched theological conflict.
It is a critical maneuver for their philosophy. The text expresses profound respect for Jesus as a historical figure and a teacher of ethics.
It wholly adopts his emphasis on universal barrier-breaking compassion, which forms the core of Christian ethics.
However, it explicitly and forcefully rejects his divinity. It insists Jesus was a mortal human, not a manifestation of God.
And by drawing that specific line, BABASHUVA aligns its core theology much closer to Judaism and Islam.
Because both of those fiercely protect the indivisibility of God and reject the incarnation.
Right. Yet simultaneously, it elevates the radical grace of the New Testament.
It essentially strips away the Hellenistic theology that established Jesus as a deity while keeping the ethical software he introduced.
I love that software analogy. BABASHUVA is really attempting to construct a theological bridge.
It is. It heavily utilizes ancient wisdom, quoting extensively from the Hebrew Bible and rooting itself in Jewish concepts of tikkun olam, but it updates the application to be completely universal.
It is attempting to engineer a spiritual framework where a Jew, a Christian, and a Muslim could theoretically participate simultaneously.
Right, without committing blasphemy against their own foundational belief in absolute monotheism.
It's creating a cross-platform spirituality, free from the bureaucratic and exclusionary friction of traditional faith, keeping only the unifying ethical core.
That's the goal.
But reading further into the sources, it becomes really clear that BABASHUVA is not merely an abstract philosophical thought experiment about unity.
Oh no, not at all.
It demands incredibly strict practical modifications to how its adherents interact with the physical world right now.
Yes. The critique of the current world order in the text is unforgiving. It introduces this concept of using religion without humanity.
That is a devastating structural critique.
It is. It implies that a person can execute every required religious ritual flawlessly, praying at the correct times, observing dietary laws, observing the Sabbath.
But if that person simultaneously acts with cruelty toward their neighbor, their religious practice is completely void.
Exactly. The ritual has been severed from its moral purpose.
Which leads directly into what the sources identify as the most demanding tenet of BABASHUVA, its stance on violence.
The text utilizes stark, almost disturbing language here.
It does. It diagnoses modern humanity as being sick with blood, and it catalogs the symptoms of this historical sickness. Endless geopolitical wars, localized murder, global terror, systemic exploitation.
To combat this, it issues a foundational, non-negotiable command in Hebrew, Surah min Hadam.
Which translates to turn away from blood.
Right, and the application of that command is where BABASHUVA introduces a massive paradigm shift compared to ancient traditions.
Because turning away from blood is not limited to human-on-human violence.
No, it is not. The text explicitly extends this universal moral baseline to the animal kingdom.
It stands firmly against animal slaughter and mandates what it calls gradual vegetarianism.
Which is a huge deal.
Okay, I need to interject with some skepticism here again, because this is where the philosophy makes a massive leap for me.
Go ahead.
Tying global world peace directly to a vegetarian diet is a profound logical leap. How does the text reconcile the biological reality of a predatory food chain with the spiritual mandate for universal vegetarianism?
It's a fair question.
I mean, it is one thing to say humans shouldn't bomb each other. It is entirely another to argue that the cessation of eating meat is a prerequisite for spiritual redemption, especially when ancient religious covenants explicitly relied on animal
Well,
sacrifice.
the text actually acknowledges that immense historical shift. If you analyze ancient Judaism, early Islam, various indigenous traditions,
Animal sacrifice wasn't just common, it was the central mechanism of the covenant.
exactly, blood was the currency of atonement. You brought livestock to a temple, it was slaughtered by a priest, and that physical transfer of life was the accepted method for balancing the spiritual scales.
And Babashuva is asserting that the shedding of blood is no longer the solution, but the core of the disease itself.
Correct. The text frames gradual vegetarianism not merely as a modern dietary preference or some environmental lifestyle choice.
It's a daily instrument for tikkun olam.
Yes. The argument is that violence is a systemic frequency. If humanity continues to systematize the slaughter of millions of animals daily, that frequency of violence, compartmentalization, and lack of empathy inevitably bleeds upward.
It bleeds into how humans treat other humans.
Exactly.
It's proposing a global, multi-species ceasefire. The logic being that if the disease is a sickness of blood, the only viable cure is a systemic, holistic cessation of violence on every single level of existence.
Starting with the dinner plate.
Right. Which honestly provides immense practical utility for the modern individual.
Absolutely. Particularly the younger demographics we discussed earlier.
The ones prone to profound existential dread.
Yes. They are subjected to a 24/7 digital news cycle of relentless global violence, environmental collapse, political polarization.
This constant exposure creates deep anxiety and a paralyzing sense of powerlessness. They feel entirely incapable of altering the macro trajectory of the world. I mean, a college student cannot negotiate a peace treaty in the Middle East.
But BABASHUVA provides them with immediate localized agency.
How so?
It argues that while an individual cannot halt a foreign war, they possess absolute control over their own participation in violence.
So by choosing radical compassion in micro moments.
Right. By rejecting the consumption of slaughtered animals, by refusing to participate in material exploitation, by stripping away the labels of the people they interact with.
They are handed a tangible, daily spiritual practice.
And the text argues that this inner localized peace directly contributes to the macro-level healing of human consciousness.
That brings us to the ultimate trajectory of this movement. If we assume the theoretical success of this philosophy,
A big if, but let's assume it.
if a critical mass of humanity adopts this multi-species ceasefire, recognizes our shared biological baseline, and ceases all forms of violence, what is the culmination of this process? Where is Nathan Orr attempting to navigate human history?
This leads us to the final and undoubtedly most ambitious theological component of the sources, the Messianic vision.
Oh, this is the big one.
The text reveals that Nathan or Ben Zvi actively positions his philosophy and his role within the traditional framework of the Messiah ben David.
The Messiah, son of David.
Yes.
Okay, that specific terminology carries an immense amount of historical and cultural baggage. When a modern audience hears the word Messiah, the immediate cultural association is a highly apocalyptic Hollywood-style event.
Oh, totally. They picture the sky tearing open, divine retribution, fire and brimstone.
The literal end of the physical world.
Right. But the text is highly aware of that apocalyptic expectation and deliberately re-engineers it.
So it's not catastrophic?
No, BABASHUVA's messianic vision is not catastrophic, it is evolutionary.
Evolution.
The ultimate goal remains an era of absolute world peace and human alignment with divine truth. But the mechanism for achieving it is drastically different.
So it is not triggered by a magical, external, world-ending event initiated by a punitive god. It bypasses the fire and brimstone entirely.
Completely. The Messianic era, according to BABASHUVA, is achieved through a critical mass of human awakening.
It's about a gradual global transformation of consciousness moving toward justice and unity.
Exactly. The sources describe the goal as the establishment of a personal spiritual kingdom on earth.
A personal spiritual kingdom. That implies that the kingdom of God is not a post-mortem destination,
No.
nor is it a geopolitical empire enforced by a returning king.
Right. It is an elevated state of collective being that humanity naturally achieves when the artificial labels and systemic violence are finally discarded.
And to ground this highly progressive, almost secular humanist-sounding vision, the sources indicate that Nathan Orr heavily utilizes ancient prophetic texts.
Yes, there is a specific citation from the book of Malachi, chapter 3, verse 1, which reads, "Behold, I will send my messenger, and he shall prepare the way before me."
The inclusion of that specific verse is a masterstroke of theological positioning.
It really is. Malachi is traditionally considered the final prophet of the Hebrew Bible.
So by quoting him, Nathan Orr is anchoring this radical, boundary-dissolving modern movement deep within the bedrock of established ancient scripture.
He's claiming legitimacy not by destroying the old texts, but by fulfilling them.
He is framing his role not as a deity to be worshipped, but as the messenger doing the logistical work of preparing the way for this new consciousness.
Yes. And the text itself, BABASHUVA, a new world, a new reality, is positioned to function as a future sacred document.
Recording the parameters of a new, universally accessible covenant between the divine and a unified human race.
It represents a complete inversion of how traditional religious mandates operate.
Because historical religious structures operate top-down.
Right. The divine commands the prophet establishes the institution enforces the law upon the individual.
But BABASHUVA proposes a strictly bottom-up spiritual revolution.
The power and the responsibility to usher in the Messianic age are placed squarely in the hands of the individual human being, activated through their daily, localized choices of radical compassion.
Okay, so synthesizing the entirety of the sources we've analyzed today, the core message of BABASHUVA is really engineered for maximum accessibility in a fractured world.
Absolutely.
It demands no theological degrees, it requires no fluency in ancient languages.
No rigid allegiance to a specific institutional hierarchy or building.
It merely requires the excruciatingly difficult daily labor of dismantling our deeply ingrained cognitive biases.
Yeah, which is no small task.
Not at all. It asks you to look at an individual across a border, across a political divide, or across a religious schism, and force your brain to recognize only the shared, fragile, skin-and-bones humanity staring back at you.
And it demands a systemic cessation of violence, from the battlefield to the dinner plate.
It is an ambitious, comprehensive attempt to write a new spiritual code capable of running on the hardware of the modern human mind.
Aiming for nothing less than the total eradication of war and hatred through universal biological empathy.
It is a profound philosophical challenge to the status quo. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final analytical thought, something to critically examine on your own that builds upon the foundational claims of BABASHUVA.
Yeah, this is a crucial question. The central thesis of BABASHUVA, this beautiful, urgent call for absolute global unity, relies entirely on the aggressive stripping away of our differences.
The mandate is to look past our nationalities, to discard our specific, historically rich religious rituals, and to dissolve the boundaries that separate us until we are left only with our bare universal biology.
But this raises a profound sociological and psychological question. Is it actually possible, or even desirable, to achieve universal human unity without simultaneously eradicating the diverse cultural tapestry that those very differences generated?
That is the ultimate tension at the heart of any universalist movement. Does true, lasting peace require the abandonment of the specific, unique identities, traditions, and distinct cultural markers that have defined human groups for millennia?
Or is there a higher, more complex cognitive state where humanity can achieve total spiritual unity while remaining fiercely and beautifully distinct?
Can we achieve global harmony without descending into cultural uniformity? Thank you for joining us on this extensive deep dive. We encourage you to analyze these sources critically, keep questioning the frameworks around you, and as always, look for the foundational humanity in the people you encounter.